Hello and happy Monday. I am Janet Gillow. I'm the Director of Professional Development for the Brown School here at Washington University in St. Louis. Welcome to Open Classroom. For those of you joining us on the Zoom webinar, you probably know this by now, but we can't see or hear you, and we also can't call on raised hands. But the chat feature is enabled, and we really do want the audience to become a part of this conversation. It really is a unique opportunity to ask the questions you've been wanting to ask of somebody who has great perspective on it. Want to welcome anyone joining us on YouTube. We are delighted to have you with us. We are not able to moderate Q&A from YouTube though, so give you a heads up on that. Throughout the program as we go, I'm going to be in the chat taking notes of your questions and comments, and I'm joined in that by Dr. Lindsay Stark, who's an Associate Dean here at the Brown School. So I'm just going to give you one tidbit of what else we have coming up at Open Classroom. This has been a service of the Brown School. We started through the pandemic, but I think we're keeping it because it's just been so effective to connect us with community here and even globally. So we're going to be back on tomorrow, which is September the 21st, Tuesday, in partnership with colleagues at the Center for Mental Health Services Research. Professor Stephen Lopez from USC is going to be joining us to give a talk on towards reducing the duration of untreated psychosis, the case of US Latinos. I'll throw a link in the chat in just a second, but that's literally one of dozens of free, interesting, insightful programs that we're offering, and we would love to have you come back for any and all of it. Today's program, though, is really, really special, and a lot of people helped make it possible, made it possible to do the outreach and let you know about it. So I just want to take it one more second to thank our co-sponsors, the Institute for Public Health Center for Human Rights, Gender, and Migration, the Brown School Center for Violence and Injury Prevention, the Clark Fox Policy Institute, the Brown Schools Committee for Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion, and also our Office of Global Programs here, and the Social Policy Institute at Washington University. We thank all these folks for their role in helping to make today possible. And now it's my great pleasure to turn the program over to Mary McKay, the Nydorf Family and Centene Corporation Dean of the Brown School. Mary.
Wonderful. Thank you, Janet. Thank you, Lindsay, for the leadership role that you played in bringing us together. I do also want to acknowledge our colleague, Kim Seelinger. Kim played a driving role in organizing our program today. So again, my name is Mary McKay, and I have the privilege of being the dean here at the Brown School. So let me extend an incredibly warm welcome to those that have joined us via our different channels. I'm grateful to our speaker for taking the time to really share your vast knowledge and perspective with us today. We are incredibly, as collectively at the Brown School, concerned about how we support those that are resettling in our local community, as well as what is happening nationally and across the globe. There's lots of ways to engage community. Our Office of Global Programs is doing direct action to support those that are resettling in our local region. We'll also be back on Open Classroom on October 25th to lay out a menu of ways that you can spend your time, your skill, your resources to support the situation of those resettling in our region, across the nation, and those that are across the globe affected by this situation in Afghanistan. So I have the real privilege of introducing my colleague, Professor Jean-Francois Trani. Professor Trani, you know that more than 2 decades, you have been focused on children, focused on their mental health, focused on disabilities of children, supporting the adults that raise them. I so appreciate your leadership in the global space, and I can't think of a more perfect colleague to really interview our guests today. So Jean-Francois, thank you for all that you do to make your science matter in the lives of children around the globe. And I'll turn it over to you to get our program started. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dean McKay. Welcome, everyone. Welcome, Carlotta Gall. It's such a privilege to have you today. Thanks for responding to our request for a talk about Afghanistan, but I know will be rich in many ideas and comments on the current and previous events. Let me introduce our guest. Carlotta Gall is a New York Times bureau chief in Istanbul currently, where she covers Turkey, but since the 15th of August, I've been also covering the events in Afghanistan. She began her career in 1994, working for the Moscow Times and reporting about the war in Chechnya, and published a book about this experience, another terrible war back at the end of the last century. She joined the New York Times in 1999, focusing on the war in Kosovo and Serbia, and then covered Afghanistan and Pakistan from 2001 until 2011. So immediately after the events of 9/11 and the intervention in the country. She received with her team the Pulitzer Prize for this work. And after 2011, for 1 year, she completed a Newman Foundation Fellowship at Harvard before heading for Tunisia and covering the Arab Springs until 2017. She wrote The Wrong Enemy, America in Afghanistan, 2001-2014, that I encourage you to read, particularly our students and those who choose international social work and global health, because this is a really interesting views of and understanding of the events and the role of Pakistan in general and the famous inter-service intelligence from that country. So thank you so much. I will start with the first question about a bit your background. How did you come to journalism? How did you end up working in Afghanistan? And how was it to cover the region for a decade?
Thank you. Thank you, Jean-Francois, for inviting me, and greetings to everyone listening. It's a privilege to be here and to talk about my favorite subject, which is Afghanistan. So how did I start? It's interesting that you mentioned I began my newspaper career at the Moscow Times in Moscow. I was a graduate of French and Russian, so I was interested in Russian affairs, and I went there. But one of the stories that helped me get that first job was actually from Afghanistan, because I visited in Afghanistan in 1992. And I actually wrote a story about women who had been raised and educated under the communist system, which had been in place for more than 10 years after the Russian invasion. And they were fleeing the country because the Mujahideen were coming in. And I remember I met this woman particularly who I wrote about, and that first freelance story helped me get one of my first jobs in newspaper publishing. So Afghanistan had featured in my life for a long time. As a student of Russia, I'd even met some of the soldiers who'd come back in the Russian times from Afghanistan, and they talked about it. With some horror, in fact, because they'd had some pretty bad experiences. And I became fascinated by Afghanistan because it was seen then, and I was a student, as Russia's Vietnam. It was a very tough war, and it came home, as it were, with the soldiers when they came home. And it caused great strife and great change in the Soviet Union. Because of their experience in the war. So I became fascinated about Afghanistan from then. I then traveled in the 90s myself to Afghanistan. My father was a journalist. He knew a lot. I helped him on some of his books. And then I became a journalist in my own right. And meanwhile, we had a family connection because my sister was an aid worker and she worked there. And I once went out to stay with her. And that was when I first visited Afghanistan. So there were a lot of things that drew me to it, but really, as I became a journalist, I became fascinated by the whole importance of the place in the bigger geopolitical world. So Russia had invaded Afghanistan in the 80s, and then we saw the rise of radicalism and bin Laden, and I knew all about bin Laden even when 9/11 happened. And so I've been following it ever since. And of course, when 9/11 happened, it was it was the big story from a major American newspaper to cover. So I was one of the people who volunteered to go and permanently be based and work out of Afghanistan. So that's really how it all happened for me. And Afghanistan, obviously I've had other jobs and I've reported from other places. I'm now in Istanbul reporting from Turkey. But Afghanistan has always had this huge importance to me, and I think to our newspaper as an American newspaper. It is still, I think, one of the most important events that's occurring and rumbling on, and that's why we need to watch and understand what's going on there.
Absolutely. Thanks for this introduction, and I think we will talk about different aspects of that in the coming hour. So I'll move towards the perspective of the media currently on really the Taliban movement, and some of them really have an understanding that it's a kind of monolithic ideological ideology, theocratic ideology. But actually, what is your take on that? What are the things that, you know, what's going on in the current government, the recently nominated government, that shows that it's not that monolithic as we might think?
Yeah, well, this is a difficult one because I've always thought, in fact, that the Taliban, unlike other Afghan movements, has been monolithic in that it's been very centrally controlled. It's had a very good discipline of its fighters, and it's always been on one message, which is to have an emirate or an Islamic system, you know, and in a forceful system, you know, a strong, centrally controlled system. And when you meet and talk to members of the Taliban, they're all on message. They all say the same thing. And so in that sense, as a movement, and I think this is why it was so successful, you know, taking power not once, but twice now, they've actually been able to keep together and keep their ideology intact and towards one goal. But of course, Afghanistan, as many of the viewers would know, is an extraordinarily complicated, disparate country. The Afghans are very united in their understanding of Afghanistan, but they all come from different tribes, different strands of Islam. You know, you have Shia and Sunni, you have different ethnic groups, multiple groups. You've got a big Pashtun element, but they're divided into their own tribes and sub-tribes and sub-clans. And then you've got quite a lot of minorities, you know, who make up almost half, in fact, more than half of the country. So you've got Tajiks, Hazaras, Uzbeks, Turkmens, Arabs, so it goes on and on. So it's a really fascinating multi-ethnic country. And I found as a reporter, every province you went to was a different war. So I was covering the war, but every province, you could never really say what was happening generally because every province was different and something different was happening. And so when you have the Taliban, they are reflective of that as well. So, you know, the southern Taliban have been traditionally very powerful. That's where it originated, from Kandahar. Mullah Omar, the founder, was from there, and most of the leaders were from there. And traditionally, southern Afghanistan has produced the leaders of Afghanistan. But then we've seen other groups became very powerful. So there's an eastern group who are particularly powerful, and they've taken power mostly in Kabul now. So we understand there's a bit of a power struggle going on right now. And they're often called the Haqqani network, after the name of one of the main leader, Jalaluddin Haqqani. He's now dead, but his sons and his brothers are very much in control. And they're sort of like a big clan, a family clan, who have taken power. And then what's very interesting, and we can talk about this perhaps a bit more later, there's the northern areas were usually traditionally against the Taliban. They now have actually grown their own groups, and they now are quite influential. And they're Taliban who, from an area which didn't traditionally have many Taliban, and in fact had traditionally resisted the Taliban. So that's very interesting because those are almost new recruits and a new development from the last, I would say, 5-10 years. And we can talk more about that if people are interested. So a very disparate group, but I think very, very disciplined in pushing one ideology and following their leader. They all swear allegiance to their leader, even if they've never seen him or met him. So in that sense, it's a very disciplined, what was a guerrilla movement. Now we'll see how they fare as a government.
Okay, I'm sure we will come back to that. Let's talk a little bit about the international intervention, multiple interventions historically in the country, and starting from the Great Game in the 19th century of Great Britain and Russia at the time, to, you mentioned the Soviet invasion in the 1980s, to the events after 9/11. So what makes Afghanistan so interesting geopolitically to the great powers of the time? And we could go back to Alexander the Great and Genghis Khan, or the Mughal Empire, really. What's so strategic about the country?
Well, that's what's so interesting, because in many ways it's not strategic. It's landlocked, doesn't have a port or access to the sea. It's very poor, it's not a wealthy country. It doesn't have great agricultural wealth. I mean, it has some areas, and it has a lot of mountains, which makes it incredibly difficult to travel around. So why is it strategically always been a target? And I think it's really because of its mountains, but it's also because it's the crossroads, and this is often talked about. It's on the Silk Road, the famous Silk Road, where trade routes used to go through from China to Europe. It was the route to India for Alexander the Great, and again then for Russia. Many people thought Russia wanted to control it because the British Empire was in India. So it became a crossroads, really, and that's why it's always been a target. If you want to control territory, the best thing is to get the main crossroads or the main intersection. In any war that you follow, the key to controlling areas is to control the main intersections. So that, I think, is why it's been a target for so long. And as you mentioned, the British went 3 times to try and control it and always struggled, because actually the other thing a mountainous country breeds is, and we've seen this whether you go to Scotland or Chechnya or the mountains of Peru, the mountains breed a very particular tough type of fighter, and the Afghans are renowned for their ability and their readiness to fight. And so that's really where the British tried to make it a barrier as a guard, again, to guard the edges of their empire. The Russians then wanted to control it, to have their own, either, there's many arguments, but to extend the communist revolutions beyond their borders, also to protect their borders, or their underbelly, as it's often called, of Central Asia. And then, maybe I'm jumping too far forward to come to the American intervention, but that was a more defensive action, of course, after 9/11.
And so, if we talk a bit about the American intervention after 9/11, which was defensive and in reaction directly of the attack in New York, what then has been the strategy and the goal? Did they shift over the 2 decades? And what justified to stay that long, and what was the interest of the US then?
Yeah, well, very difficult and long question. Obviously, we all know what happened at 9/11. There was the most horrific, terrorist attack on American soil, which killed, 3,000 people. And so it was very quick. And people like me who'd been studying, we knew almost instantly that this was bin Laden, or was the work of bin Laden, because, that was the sort of thing he was after. So, of course, he's harbored by the Taliban government that was in power at the time. he was known to have safe haven with them. So of course, not only America, but all NATO allies and most of the world understood and supported the American need to take action against both Al-Qaeda, which was behind the attack, but the Taliban government also, which was harboring Al-Qaeda and refused, basically were reluctant to give him up, because they were asked to give him up and they didn't, they declined. So that main invasion was, of course, to catch and bring to justice the main perpetrators. Of course, that proved actually very difficult. Immediately, they were quite quickly able to overthrow the Taliban government, but Al-Qaeda fled and mostly were not caught, and it took months after to pursue them and to find them. And that's still going on because there are some who are still alive who were involved in those days. In particular, the number two, bin Laden's number two, Ayman al-Zawahiri, he's still out there and he's hiding in the mountains in and near Afghanistan. So there's a lot that wasn't achieved. Obviously, there was a lot that was achieved, and they did catch Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, who was seen as one of the masterminders of the attack. And I went out very soon after 9/11. I went out in November 2001 to Afghanistan and started covering the war and reporting on what was happening. And we saw a lot of the Taliban defeated and surrender at that time. A lot of them, I found, a lot had actually escaped across the border to Pakistan. And that's really where the war should have shifted, or if not a war, pursuit of the main culprits. But what happened, of course, was there were relations with Pakistan for various reasons. It was complicated and difficult for the Americans to go into or to pursue any fugitives in Pakistan. And meanwhile, there was a lot to do in Afghanistan. And so the military, and not just American military, but I know the British were there, the Turks were there, a lot of people came to the aid of America. They all started to look around Afghanistan and say, well, we need to fix this country to stop the same thing happening again. And that was the main thought at the time, I remember, is that Afghanistan had been left to its own devices, poor, violent, and prey to all sorts of groups who set up camps and then did their own things, like Al-Qaeda. They started making bombs and training people to do terrorist attacks around the world. So the thinking was, we mustn't let this happen again. We've got to help Afghanistan become a stable, viable country that can educate and raise its people and be a responsible member of the international community. And so that was the aim. And of course, that was so ambitious. A country of, 30 million people, very poor. There was really barely a functioning state. There was hardly any intact buildings in the center of Kabul, even. It had been sort of bombed to smithereens for so many years. So it was just an immense, there was barely a single road that was not potholed and terrible to try and drive down. So the work was just immense. And of course, it could take not just 20 years, which is what happened, but it could have actually taken 60 years to fix it and raise a functioning democratic government. So the ambition was there at the beginning. It just got bigger and bigger and bigger and more difficult. And then, as we'll probably discuss, the Taliban insurgency, which was really defeated in 2001. I mean, I saw them surrender in huge numbers. They limped out of the country, but they were lifted back up and they came back. And over 20 years of enormous support from Pakistan, they became so powerful that they could actually challenge the government and overthrow the government very quickly when it was left on its own. So, we could go on talking for hours about where the West went wrong, but that was really the aim, to lift Afghanistan up so that wouldn't have a repeat of 9/11. And in fact, what happened was that was such a difficult task. And meanwhile, the Taliban was allowed to come back and build itself up again. And so the aim was, they missed the main point of defeating Taliban. And let me stop there, and you can come back if you want more questions on that.
Yes, actually, I'm going to react on both points. The first one is, okay, Pakistan is directly involved in the reconquest of the country in the last, it has been a decade, right, or even more, since 2005, when violence resumed. But I mean, Pakistan alone, and who in Pakistan, and where is the money coming from? Because, I mean, Pakistan is not but a wealthy country, sustaining such a large group of armed, soldiers is expensive and require quite some logistics. So are there powers involved, interested in destabilizing the Afghan Republic at the time?
Well, this is actually the great irony. I mean, I think I know where your questioning is heading, but I will pull you up first to say America funded Pakistan hugely in the years after 9/11, because I think the American government knew full well, especially diplomats and intelligence agents, they knew full well what Pakistan was up to, and what the fact that they had supported heavily the Taliban government of the 1990s. And so they gave them an ultimatum after 9/11, you're with us or against us. And Pakistan sided with America because they had long relations with America. In order for that, they were paid a great deal of money to help fund the army and the counterterrorism effort, which was, hunting down Al-Qaeda elements, guarding their borders, and so on. And Pakistan got billions of dollars from the American government to pay for that. And they were very clever. They kept taking more money. I saw the Taliban first gathering in 2003, but I later learned that they gathered even earlier. I hope my internet connection is keeping strong. I'm just getting a message here, but tell me if you can't hear me, because I can turn off the video if we have to. So Pakistan was doing that, was gaining money, and this was the terrible irony that America was fighting an insurgency, but also paying the country that was supporting the insurgency. Gradually, that money was reduced, I think, from the American side. Certainly when I was reporting there was an effort to control the expenses and reduce the support for Pakistan from the American government. But by then, the Taliban had found its own ways to fund itself. There was no doubt that it was always receiving money from the Gulf countries, the Arab countries of the Persian Gulf, but particularly there were from Saudi Arabia, we knew a lot from Kuwait, from United Arab Emirates. Most of this was private donations. There's hugely, fabulously wealthy individuals there, but also foundations, mosques, and so on. And so a lot of it was informal. So the governments would say, we're not supporting this group. But for many years, they didn't do much to stop the private foundations. And so we as reporters knew the Taliban people, the finance people, were traveling often to do the Hajj, to do the pilgrimage to Saudi Arabia, and also doing other visits to other countries, and they were collecting money. And one of the financiers of the Taliban later told me that he'd made multiple trips, fundraising trips to the Gulf countries. So that helped a lot. They also, of course, run the poppy business. The Taliban has always run the poppy business which is, illegal narcotics, which is enormously, hugely wealthy business in Afghanistan. The Afghan government never managed to stamp it out. In fact, made their own money, some of them. But the Taliban had always taxed it because they controlled the southern areas, they controlled the routes out. The illegal opium always traveled out through Pakistan, and the Taliban controlled those routes and into Iran. So they learned how to make money on those sort of things, and then by the end they've been taxing farmers and mines and everything else, and now they've obviously controlled all the customs of Afghanistan, which brings in a large amount of money. So they've learned how to make their own money, as well as benefiting from, I think, clearly state and military aid from Pakistan, because they had clearly very heavy military and logistical support for their fight, always coming from Pakistan. So I hope that answered all those.
It does, thanks. And the other dimension of what you were saying is, so we had this enormous, challenge to build a democracy, develop a country from basically scratch, right? No roads, no electricity, no real industry, invest in no industry actually, no bank system, etc. And so the international community poured trillions of dollars, including for the Afghan army, but even in civilian support, thousands of NGOs, the UN system largely present. So what have we achieved in those 2 decades? What can we expect that will be maintained? How did we manage to create some balance between urban centers, which seem really pretty developed, and comparatively to other cities in the region, could, revolve or compare in terms of wealth and organizations, and more rural or very remote rural areas where farmers have been living mostly in the same way for centuries. Yeah, so what did we achieve and what can we expect for the future?
Yeah, well, I think it's important to remember just how destroyed Afghanistan was in 2001, because they'd had terrible years of, they'd had the Russian invasion. There were whole villages wiped out during the Russian invasion that had never been rebuilt. I remember seeing a lot of them, and people finally coming back. After that, there were millions of refugees in Pakistan and Iran who had never come back. So there was, and then, on the cover of my book, it has this really haunting picture of some kids playing football in a street of complete ruined street in the center of Kabul. And I often pick that up just to remind myself that's how destroyed it was. There were, parts of Kabul were just a moonscape of old, broken walls and nothing else. So if you remember that, that's what took so long to build. And now every district has buildings. So, the Americans really mainly built a district center, a police station. Sometimes there was maybe one-room police station, but they would build proper buildings so that each district, and there's hundreds of districts of Afghanistan, has a functioning administration. So they have a building, an administration where you can go and you can to the government. So that, when you think of that, you've got hundreds of, I don't know how many districts there are, but more than 400, I think. That's already buildings, administration buildings in every single district, and rural districts, and then schools. They built hundreds and hundreds of schools all around the country. For years, people were studying in tents, but eventually they did get built. And then, miles and miles of roads, which of course, and bridges, which then, got damaged again in the fighting and got rebuilt. So there was an incredible amount of building, just physical building. But I think what I always remember was the really striking thing. And this, even if in the district, you'd go to a farmer and he would be plowing with his oxen and his wooden plow, like the medieval times in Europe. he would also have a school, and his daughters would be going to school. And then you would, you know, if you, after a few years, you found those daughters were already the teachers in the school. Sometimes they were only 16, but they were already good enough to be a teacher. And then, you know, and then you saw midwives turn up, and they were young women who'd been trained as midwives. So I remember always being rather amazed when I traveled around Afghanistan, how quickly the new generations were starting up. And so I remember seeing a young 20-something district chief, and he was, you know, he'd studied under since 9/11, and he'd now got his first job, and he was the administrator because he was the most educated in his village or his little town. So that sort of thing really impressed me, because you could see the generations changing and the education. And then, of course, you know, Afghanistan got its ministries going, it got its banks, you know, there's quite a lot of hiccups along the way, quite a lot of corruption. But you really had a very, very good functioning electronic banking system now when Taliban came in and stopped, everything got stopped. But I mean, really, everyone was getting paid digitally, everyone had cards, and you know, the soldier on the front line was getting paid, and he was able for his family to pick up the money for food, even if he was right across the country. So things were really, really dramatically different after 20 years.
And so that leads to the next question. And with the withdrawal, what are we to expect for these, you know, these people who really were born under the Republic and had access to education, to, you know, certain prosperity, leadership, including, as you said, women in many domains. What's going to happen to them? And linked to that, what's their feelings towards the US, the international community as well, and what can we, you know, how did it change over time since 2001, and where are we today?
Yeah. Well, I can't tell you how devastating it is for anyone like you or me who's worked there, to see this collapsing, because, you know, the Taliban, of course, they also have a right to power, but the way they're taking it and taking over is very worrying, because they've basically already gone back to some of their old ways, and they're ordering women to stay at home. No woman can leave the house, they say, unless she's accompanied by a male relative. That's their rule, which ensures that their very strict code of behavior. And they've also said girls can't go to school. I mean, they've said, they put it another way. They said boys can come back to school, and there's no mention of the girls. So all the girls, you know, the millions of girls who were studying are now sitting at home. And so that is extremely worrying. It's literally just happened 2 days ago, because that is going to affect the whole development of the country, and the whole another generation of girls who had just climbed out of that darkness and that segregation. So that's extremely worrying. On the immediate concern is people are already reporting about it in the women's care in hospitals. Women giving birth, midwives, are they no longer allowed, or they cannot come to work because they don't have a husband perhaps, or a male relative to accompany them. And so you've also got lack of electricity suddenly, and lack of money. And so suddenly you've got a rapid deterioration of services. So you're going to have, rising health problems, and maternal mortality, which has been a huge fight to get it reduced. So already you're seeing those sort of things spiraling back out of control. So that's extremely worrying. I think the other thing that people are very worried about is the Taliban, did take control by force. So now, are they going to detain their enemies? What's happening to the people who were against them? Are they going to be allowed to live peacefully? And so there's, I think, extreme anxiety. There's a lot of people who've gone into hiding. A lot of people, as you know, fled the country. So that, I think, is particularly worrying, because when you have regime change, you usually go right back to the beginning. And all the newcomers want to take power, but they don't know how to run things. And so you see a major collapse of services and of government. And that's such a shame, because I think there was a hope that there could have been an inclusive or a peace agreement that could have prevented the collapse of everything. And I think what we're looking at now is the collapse of much of what has been gained in the last 20 years. So the schools might still be standing, but if the girls and the women teachers can't come, it's all going, all that knowledge is going to be forgotten and gone to waste. So it's a great moment of concern for a lot of people.
Is there any capacity of leverage of the international community, knowing that they just pledged $1 billion to help for humanitarian assistance? This will be implemented by NGOs, the UN system. Can we imagine that this will come with some conditionality on, if you want to maintain the healthcare system, you need to find a way to still take care of the health of girls and women. And similarly, if you want to maintain primary school education at least, which was the initial idea a few weeks ago, then you still need women's teachers. And anyway, if you want to perpetuate the link between the current generation working of women in those specific areas, you need to make sure the next generation could arrive to that level. Universities are reopened, at least private universities are reopened, boys and girls or women and men are separated. Could we imagine that there will be, okay, the maram, so the male accompany person in the family will probably have to accompany women, but will there be a possibility, at least in some professions, to maintain the needed presence of women, and what can we do about it?
Yeah, I think it's going to be very difficult. But I think there are ways you can do it. I mean, if you think back to how, Afghanistan is a very conservative country anyways. So a lot of people, a lot of families do not let other men see their women. So they live in purdah, they keep them heavily veiled when they go out and so on. But they do take them to the doctor or the hospital. And there they want a controlled environment where only women will treat them and so on. But then, so you can find a way. So you can have a women's section, you have a women's entrance, you have women, but then you have to have women working there. And if you can't train them and have them study, how do you get the women doctors? And even the women who do the security check, you have to have women police officers. So this is something the Taliban has got to confront. They essentially don't want women in the workspace, but there are now many needs for women, including their own wives and daughters, who will need medical care. So, so they will have to be persuaded to gradually find ways that are acceptable to them, that allow girls to be educated. But right now they've said no, and they said, we know when they were previously in the government in the 90s, they kept saying we will open girls' schools when the time is right, when the conditions are right, but then conditions never came. And then of course the real fear of segregating classes, so you can say, okay, they have to sit separately, or they have to have women, the girls have to only have women teachers, that inevitably means that the girls get second class treatment, because there won't be enough women teachers, there won't be enough funds to have two separate universities and so on. So if you abandon co-education, the women tend to get the worst deal, because there's just not enough to go around, So the hope is that the Taliban is changing and will change, but actually the people in charge, and I know them from watching them for a long time, they have not changed, and they will be very rigid on this. And they've set up, they've closed the Women's Affairs Ministry, they've set up the famous Ministry of the Prevention of Vice and the Protection of Virtue, and which is basically the religious police, and they've installed that it's in power, so they will be punishing people who step out of line according to their ways of behavior. So unfortunately, I think it's going to be a very, very long struggle to push for women's rights again in Afghanistan. I think they're taking major steps backwards. I'm not saying it's impossible, because there are all those educated women who presumably will be pushing their husbands and their relatives to allow them or help them keep working or keep training and so on. But it's going to be a very long, hard struggle, I think. And I think the Taliban is going to prove to be very rigid. So it's going to be a very, very long, slow process to try and allow some ways of women continue working.
Thank you. I think we have 15 minutes, so we should take questions from the audience. I have a couple here. There's a lot of interest about the geopolitical aspect of things, and part of it is what was the relationship the role of the US in the region before 9/11. Another aspect is why the US are actually funding Pakistan. Can we know a little more about it, knowing that part of it goes to the Taliban? We are not our allies. And I will start with those two and keep monitoring.
Yeah, so it's very interesting, because Pakistan was always a friend of the US, and especially when in its rivalry with India, the US was always had a good relationship with Pakistan. It's partly because Pakistan has a nuclear bomb, and it's the only Muslim country to date that has the nuclear bomb. And so I think that there was always a feeling in the US that they were, it was important to have them as an ally rather than an enemy. And then of course what happened was, when the Russians invaded Afghanistan in the 1980s, Pakistan was immediately became host to millions of refugees, and they became the center of the effort, which was really run by the US, but also by Saudi Arabia and Pakistan, to help the guerrilla movement, the Mujahideen, who were fighting against the Russian invasion. So America became very deeply involved in that. And as we all knew, it was a covert war, but we all learned that America was supporting the Mujahideen. And so they worked very closely with Pakistan then. And that was really how it all, not all began, but how it became very engaged with Pakistan, and that Pakistan learned and decided on its way of controlling and running the Mujahideen, and therefore controlling the fate of Afghanistan. And so Pakistan then just took that and ran with it. And the US became disengaged in the 90s. And it was really because communism fell. As you know, the Berlin Wall came down, the Soviet Union broke up, and they felt they'd won the war against communism. And I think also, I as a journalist remember, the whole West became really focused on Eastern Europe and the former Soviet bloc breaking up. So there was a lot of work to help all those countries become democracies, basically, and do the transition from, centralized communist countries to joining the Western world. And so really the focus just left Afghanistan, and Pakistan was left with Afghanistan and did what it's wanted. And that's really how it all happened. And then but America never lost its connection with Pakistan. And so I think after 9/11, it made sense. They felt it made sense to engage Pakistan and aid Pakistan, support it, to try and have it on its own side. And I think that's where the American government really missed what Pakistan was doing, or allowed it, saw it, and didn't think it could stop. But I think for a long time just didn't understand what was happening. And I think that's where they really mishandled this entire thing, because Pakistan was always the source it was where bin Laden hid out for 10 years. It was where the Taliban regrouped and restarted their war. America did nothing, and that was why I wrote my book called The Wrong Enemy, because America was fighting a war in Afghanistan, but the real enemy was actually in Pakistan. Not only the Pakistani military and intelligence service, which was running the war, but they were hosting bin Laden. He was hiding out in a safe house, and I eventually discovered it was known to members of the Pakistani intelligence that he was there. And the same, I would say, with the Ayman al-Zawahiri, who's the leader of Al-Qaeda today. He's hiding in Pakistan and he's in a safe house. I can pretty well certainly say that. So this is the weirdness of geopolitics, if you like, or realpolitik. You know, this is America thinking, well, it's better to be friends with Pakistan because they can be a really bad enemy. But Pakistan was playing a double game the entire time. And American soldiers were dying at the hands of people who were supported by Pakistan. And yet America was friends and made Pakistan a non-NATO ally, which is it's the next best thing. If you don't make them a member of NATO, you make a country a non-NATO ally, give them a lot of military aid and do joint exercises and all that. So it was really an extraordinary situation to be in, and I think it still needs a lot of investigation why it was allowed to happen like that.
Thanks. That's really helpful. Another question is about the relationship of a new Islamic Emirate with the rest of the world, and particularly the Asian countries. What can we expect of this relationship?
It's very interesting, and I think this is actually going to be something we need to follow, but I'm really not sure how it's going to play out, because for the moment, the big powers, which were consulted about this American withdrawal, so I'm talking about Russia, China, Pakistan, because they're the neighbor, and the Gulf countries, you know, Qatar, which hosted the peace talks, United Arab Emirates, which has always had a big role in hosting a lot of Taliban and so on. They all were consulted, and they were all, I think, accepting of the American withdrawal. And in particular, Russia and China hosted delegations from the Taliban, so they started opening relations with the Taliban. Going forward, I'm really not sure how far that will go. I think Russia and China are, you know, being sensible in a changing geopolitical part of the region. They're making connections with the Taliban, but I don't think they will like them too much. Russia certainly doesn't. So Russia can work with them if they don't encourage terrorism in the southern Russian states, or if not terrorism, radical Islam, because Russia hates that. The same with China. I mean, the Taliban have always had an ally of the Uyghur movement that is against Chinese control, and so they have some real radical Uyghurs with them. So what will happen down the road? I'm not very clear on that. Pakistan is inevitably happy, but like China and Russia, they want the West to help keep funding the Afghans. So it's really very unsure. I think the West is going to have conditions-based dealings with the Taliban. So you've got to ease up on women's rights if you want us to help fund, you know, the development needs of Afghanistan. So it's going to be, I think, a bit ad hoc for quite a while. And China and Pakistan, I think, would like to develop trade and infrastructure projects, but let's see how fast that goes, because they will need security and they will also not want to foot the bill for everything. So I think it's still very unsure how Afghanistan is going to survive.
Thanks for this insight. Any other questions from the crowd? Janet, I didn't see. we have a question about the adaptation of the Taliban to new rules of communication, social media, and their ability to have an external message and maybe do something different within the borders of the country. I don't know if you want to.
Well, that's interesting. I mean, because a lot of people say the Taliban has changed. A lot of people like me say, well, actually, slow down. They haven't changed in their ideology, but they have obviously changed in that they didn't used to use the television. You know, they smashed every television screen in the country in the 90s, and they had no internet. I remember having to teach Afghans when I first arrived. We had to teach them what was email. And now, of course, you know, the whole world has changed so much in the digital sense, but the Taliban have also embraced social media, internet. They're very savvy on their use of the media. They, of course, will control the media very strongly, and they've already visited some of the newspapers and they give veiled threats. So they say, you can keep working, but you shouldn't do you shouldn't do this type of reporting, or don't go there because otherwise we can't guarantee your security. So they're very clever. They say this to foreign journalists as well, by the way. So they control, but in a rather sophisticated way, by saying we don't want something bad to happen to you, this sort of thing, which is a veiled threat if you're a journalist. But they have embraced the modern media very much so, and that is a different thing from before, because they didn't allow even, you know, video cameras or anyone to be filmed in the past. I think, though, we will see a very strict control of it and a very careful manipulation, a bit like Pakistan does. Pakistan controls the media and the messaging very strongly. I think they will take their cue from there.
Okay, there's another question about the perception of, I mean, how other Muslim countries, and particularly countries in the Gulf, consider the kind of Islamic law the Taliban are trying to enforce, particularly their vision of the role of women that should not be in the public sphere, right? Do they share completely this vision? Do they all apply it within their own borders, or are they going to try to influence the new emirate in a different direction?
I think they very much adopted, and this all comes from the training in the madrasas that they've had in Pakistan. They have accepted, and they all believe in it, in having an emirate, which is something you see in particular in the Gulf states, which means you have a very much a religiously controlled state, in that the mullahs are very important and it's almost a theocracy, but you also have a recognized head of state. And in the Gulf states, it's a royal monarch. But in somewhere like the Taliban's emirate, it's a judge or an elected, a chosen official, you know, who's the head. So I think they will stick with that. They like that, and I think they've been very. All their recruits have all come up through the madrasa with this a very strong belief that this is the best form of government. And they have no experience of democracy or different views, or the vibrancy of having different views. However, I would say Afghans naturally are very, very free-thinking people. And I think this is why I can see you smiling, why so many of us love going there and spending time in the country, because Afghans are fearless in saying what they think. And they did take to democracy, I think, with great alacrity. They loved the open media. They loved being able to talk truth to power. And so I think the Taliban are going to have to deal with that. And another simple thing is they're banning music, because the religious conservatives think music is not good, except for Islamic chanting. But Afghans love their music, and it's a very strong tradition. And in the last government, the Taliban everyone was playing music quietly at home, or smuggling tapes in. around the checkpoints and so on. And so I think that will start again. People won't accept to not have music, because Afghans have a great tradition of folkloric music, but also modern music. Got lots of modern Western-based Afghans who are putting out great tapes and videos on YouTube and everything. So how do you stop that? So I think the Taliban, although they really believe in their system, there are some places where there are going to be cracks. There's definitely going to be some rebellion there, because Afghans are also, you know, quite natural rebels. So I think it's going to be a fascinating and a very important thing to watch and to see how they cope. And I just hope they don't get too draconian, because they have in the past been very, very vicious in enforcing their rules. So that's where I think a lot of us are very concerned about.
Thank you so much for this amazing talk.
Out of time.
Yes, it's time. Do you have a final thoughts you would like to share with the audience?
Just to say, I'm so happy to be invited, because I think it is such an important country. It's easy to say there's lots of poor developing countries out there, but Afghanistan really has been, you know, hugely important in recent history. And then so many people from the US and other countries have gone there and worked there and served there and of course lost their lives there. So I think it's really important to understand what's going on and understand the pressures and the pulls of the geopolitics and of the people themselves. So I really welcome this chance to talk about it. And I would urge everyone to keep an eye on Afghanistan, because it's always full of surprises and it's not going to go away. So we should all keep our eye on it and keep learning about it.
Thank you so much. Thank you everyone for participating, and yeah, we'll continue reading and including your coverage. Thank you so much,
No,
Carlotta.
thank you. All the best.